In order to truly understand what Kamala Harris's candidacy truly represents for the future of America, we have to understand the mentality and the worldview that she, or at least those who support her policies that she is actively promoting, work under. And so in this video, we're going to actually dissect what I call the authoritarian mind, which is a way of thinking that is universal across certain types of people, i.e. authoritarians, but it will provide us unique insights into Kamala Harris's particular mode of engagement, and it will help inform all of us as Americans on how this phenomenon manifests throughout history and how it is manifesting here in this particular moment. Before we get into that, my friends, hope all of you are doing well. I am Christian Watts. Thank you so much for being here. If you enjoy political and social commentary with a philosophical bent, then I must implore you, please like, share, comment, subscribe, and do whatever you can to help us get our message out there. We are on the march towards 20,000, my friends. I am so excited. And so please, if you want to support this operation, you can donate, you can like, you can subscribe, you can at least comment. All of those things help us tremendously. Now, please enjoy the video. So, authoritarianism is something that many of us, in our own understanding, are familiar with, though a lot of people don't truly understand how authoritarians tick, and most importantly, how they think. Now, there are many good books written about this particular topic. The great Hannah Arendt wrote The Origins of Totalitarianism, which she essentially used to dissect how dictatorship and authoritarianism rose in 1930s Germany, and there are plenty of other erudite authors that have written about the same thing. But in my studies, I have found that the authoritarian mind, whether you're talking about Pol Pot, Stalin, whoever you're talking about, whether it's Che Guevara, I don't care who it is. I don't care if it's a big-time authoritarian or a low-level authoritarian like Kamala Harris. The authoritarian mind ticks in some ways that are just universally applicable throughout history. There are three aspects of the authoritarian mind that one must understand in order to get this. Number one, the authoritarian mind reflects a particular attitude about power. So authoritarians will oftentimes view power in a particular way that is beyond the bare minimum use of power. Power is actually essential to their worldview. It's one of the reasons why they are authoritarians. Second, their mentality reflects a certain attitude about politics. So, power is simply a tool. Politics is the application of that tool towards the ends of governance. This is especially important because authoritarians will oftentimes cloak their power grabs in terms of good governance. They'll use some kind of utilitarian argument to justify their presence in a society. Oh, I'm going to help the downtrodden. We're going to destroy the oligarchs. We're going to destroy the greedy billionaires and millionaires. Whatever it is, authoritarians always have some kind of scapegoat, and their political sensibilities always conform to that mode of engagement. Number three, the authoritarian mind also reflects an attitude about concepts. And we'll begin here. This is actually quite important. Hannah Arendt does make this point in The Origins of Totalitarianism, Part 3, where she mentions that in Germany, the rise of National Socialism was happened within the context of the masses, the German people, taking in a simplified, totalizing idea of reality. Now, the authoritarian operates within this totalizing idea because the authoritarian's entire mindset must be guided by some higher principle. And so they'll sometimes it'll be, for example, the preservation of the working class. Sometimes it'll be the restoration of the nation state. Whatever it is, there is one single simplified idea under which all of reality must fit for the authoritarian to execute their project. Now, we're going to take these principles and evaluate them within the context of Kamala Harris's statements and her record. So, the third one, how authoritarianism reflects an attitude towards concepts. Look at what Kamala Harris said here during a appearance, a kind of low-key appearance with Tim Walz. You'll find it quite surprising. Go.
We believe in the collective. We're not falling for these folks who are trying to divide us, trying to separate us, trying to pull us apart. That's not where the strength lies.
We believe in the collective. They cannot divide us. Now, beyond the obvious conceptual problems this position comes with, I'll explain some of them, the fact that if you do not know distinctions, you can't know reality, because we understand reality by virtue of being able to rationally divide things into proper categories and then use those categories to buttress and refine our understanding. If you believe in this whole collective notion, you are denying distinctions, which means you can't know reality. Beyond that conceptual error, which all thinking people should avoid like the plague, this statement reflects a certain attitude about concepts, especially about political concepts, that the focus and emphasis must be on this fantastical, non-existent, disembodied, abstract collective by which everything is justified. And anything that falls short of that standard is somehow an injustice, it's somehow a great evil, it is somehow a perversion of what should be, or what can be in the terms of Kamala Harris. So you have to understand how this mentality can be used for authoritarian purposes. This mentality is a simplified view of reality, and it's an even simpler view of political relationships. Let's actually take this to a logical conclusion. If you believe in the collective, and your political considerations are based upon the collective, then any objection that someone gives you must then therefore be in defiance of the collective, and it must then therefore be in defiance of what is good. These are how these simplified ideas can bring rise to policies that are just fundamentally immoral and have no place in a free society, because it hits a kind of emotional chord with people that gets them thinking on levels that are not realistic. There is no collective. There are only people and people within communities, but there is no collective. But this single idea, which underlined the entire theory of Jean-Jacques Rousseau, the entire political theory, rather, of Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who the progressive movement benefits from heavily, this single idea, he called it the general will and the social contract, that we are all subsumed to this greater thing, is the prerequisite, for an authoritarian political project. Now, as I mentioned, the second pillar of the authoritarian mind, they have a certain attitude towards power. Now, in order to see how Kamala Harris connects with this, we have to go back to her tenure as Attorney General in California. During her tenure as Attorney General in California, Kamala Harris's office got into several situations, several very, very bad situations. One of them being her handling of a Supreme Court ruling over a prison. So in 2014, the California Attorney General's office, which is when she was in office as Attorney General, opposed the release of nonviolent inmates from prisons on the grounds that prisons would lose an important labor pool. Now, Harris later came out and said she had no idea that her office sent out a statement that claimed this, that argued for keeping prisoners for labor purposes. Now, let's assume that is true. If that is true, that disqualifies her from being president because she has no oversight over what her own office, the one that she administers, is doing, which is a mark against her. Now, let's say that's not true. Not only is she lying if that's not true, but it reflects a certain mentality about power that Kamala Harris happens to have. That you can justify things, even if they deviate from their proper purposes, on the basis of preserving the authority of your area of government, on the basis of preserving the authority of the government. That is essentially what this particular justification is right here. Because prisons are not meant to be places that put you in hard labor. Of course, many of them do. That's not their goal. Their goal is to punish a wrong. And the moment prisons go beyond punishing a wrong, and they go into using your wrongs as a benefit for the government, is the moment prisons become defunct and deficient in their proper operation. And Kamala Harris was more than willing to compromise the principles of American justice to serve her own purposes. The authoritarian uses power in a manner that emboldens themselves and emboldens their conception of society against every other consideration. That is Kamala Harris. And that kind of goes into some other things that happened as well with Kamala Harris. So, for example, Kamala Harris when she was San Francisco's district attorney in 2010, she protected a lab technician who was connected with hundreds of cases and convictions. A lab technician that deliberately sabotaged cases, that deliberately mishandled evidence. And when this lab technician was brought to task, Harris continued to defend this lab technician, even though the evidence against them was insurmountable, so much so that 600 cases that were handled by that technician had to be dismissed. Again, this is a mentality towards power. It's not about what's right or wrong. It's about what is advantageous to your perception in that particular moment. But let's go beyond her prosecutorial record, and let's go into Kamala Harris's record as a politician and as a public speaker, where she has said numerous things that reflect a concerning mentality about power. So, for example, Kamala Harris, when she ran for president back in 2019, she was asked quite simply what she thought about fracking and all that kind of stuff, and if she would ban it. Why?
There's no question I'm in favor of banning fracking. So, yeah, and starting with what we can do on day one around public lands, right?
Wow, look at that. It's an attitude about power that we're talking about there, and I'll get into that in a second. Then Kamala Harris was asked about hate speech, a concept that she wholly believes in, and how we should handle hate speech on social media. Watch.
It has to be a responsibility that is placed on these social media sites to understand their power. They are directly speaking to millions and millions of people without any level of oversight or regulation. And that has to stop.
So in all of these examples, Kamala Harris is making the argument, whether she knows it or not, that the prime mover of society is not people operating in their own capacities. It's not communities that come together to do good. It's not virtuous men and women that are endowed with good character and the fire of reason and virtue. No. It is instead the government. It is instead the central managers. It is instead those who wield authority. Kamala Harris believes that that it is the duty of the government, not again people who are on social media platforms, people who have a vested stake in ensuring that social relationships are not burdened down by hate speech or whatever she calls it. She believes it is the duty of the government to ensure a nice and proper society. Properness and niceness do not come from the barrel of a gun. Properness and niceness come from strong moral education within the citizenry. And unfortunately, in the West right now, we have a severe problem with moral education. It's actually one of the main reasons, it's one of the main upstream reasons why we are having so much chaos right now in the first place. The number three, this is one of the more egregious things that I've seen, is that she believes that the solution to the energy problem, which is a problem that many people believe we have with global warming or whatever, is again to force people into arrangements that may not be advantageous for them economically, that may be harmful to their communities, but only in the wisdom of the managers and the experts is this kind of thing deemed wise. Regardless of if you agree with these positions or not, they all reflect an authoritarian mindset where the answer comes from the top and everything else is simply discarded. And this, again, mindset about power feeds neatly into this mindset about politics, because politics is simply the ordered application of power. So, what are we to conclude from all of this? A few things, my friends. Number one, whether you believe Kamala Harris is a high-level thinker or not, that is irrelevant. What is relevant is that the fact that the authoritarian mind transcends the boundaries of geography, and it can manifest within the behavior of any politician or any person who has a substantial amount of power. Remember what Xenophon said in the Hero, which is one of his philosophical dialogues that he wrote back in ancient Greece. Xenophon basically said through the characters that the tyrant is not necessarily entirely worried about having power per se. The tyrant is worried about being able to keep the excesses of his unrestrained character, the excesses of his vice alive and well. And that may mean being skeptical of other people, that may mean getting power, but it doesn't necessarily mean that. For us here in practical terms, it simply means that you can have a kind of authoritarian tyrant that exists in many forms and manifests differently, but it's the same phenomenon that is just moving in a different way. So it's important for us to recognize this trait not just in Kamala Harris, but in anybody who exhibits certain kinds of attitudes about power in the world. Secondly, we should take this to mean something else as well. And this is going to be, again, this is going to be a rather provocative statement, but it's really important. This is fundamentally a civilizational election. It's an election that will not decide the kind of civilization we're going to be, but it's an election that I think will set into motion a set of events that could end up shaping the kind of civilization we're going to be. And so I think that the choice should then therefore be made on the basis of that consideration. However you decide to vote, I will not presume to tell you how to vote. You probably know what my opinion is, but that's not important for the purposes of this video. And third is that there is a vacuum created within this country that moral education used to fill. In the 18th century, in the 19th century, there was big discussion about morality, ethics, and philosophy. Those discussions have become replaced by reality TV and influencer drama and 60-second TikTok videos about nothing. They do nothing to feed your mind, nothing to feed your soul. They simply give you a diet of constant dopamine hits that leads you to a dead end in life and a dead end in thinking and ultimately ruin your ability to think deeply about the world. We should see the ascendancy of Kamala Harris and any other authoritarian, and there have been many within the context of the American experiment. Huey Long, FDR, many. We should see their ascendancy as a lapse in our duty as a citizenry to stand up against tyranny and authoritarianism in all its forms, and as a lapse in our ability to apply sound moral concepts to the contemporary politics of the day. Kamala Harris's ascendancy would not be possible if we still exercise that ability fruitfully and as often as we should, but we don't. Many of us don't. And that is because that is downstream of a deterioration in how we think about the world, how we think about politics. So, in conclusion, we ought to recognize the signals here of the authoritarian mindset that exists within Kamala Harris's platform. We ought to reject them. Then we ought to look at our own selves and ask ourselves what we can do for the future to ensure that such occasions never rise, for us to have to even ponder what it might look like for an authoritarian as nakedly transparent as Kamala Harris to assume the reins of power within our great republic. My friends, like, share, comment, subscribe, do whatever you can to get our message out there. My friends, study history, study philosophy, remain morally convicted, and please stay pensive.